This week I've been thinking a lot about the hymn, "What is the World Like?" And I'm not so much interested in the particular lyrics, though they are lovely, but I'm taken by the full question that the hymn asks as its opening line. What is the world like when God's will is done? And I dare say, in response to the question, a world that genuinely resembles the will of God, a world that runs as God would desire, probably bears very little resemblance to the world as we know it. Not with the warfare, not with the divisiveness, not with the casual cruelty, not with the profound and profane income disparity, not with all the intolerance and all of the isms that define our relationships. And that, in part, is why I'm so invested in the sermon series that we're working through. Because these Lenten practices that we are exploring, these ways of being in the world as people of faith, are not mere niceties, not just good habits. Practices such as mindfulness and compassion, as we've dealt with in recent weeks, practices such as hospitality and truth-telling that we'll explore in coming weeks, these are a window into what the world is like when God's will is done. And the practice I hope to explore this week, the practice of simplicity or sufficiency, is one that challenges me. I think it's genuinely a tough one to wrap our heads around in our consumer culture, because the very cultural air we breathe or water we swim in constantly invites us to desire more, to acquire more, to believe that we need more. We're bombarded with messaging that says you aren't enough and you don't have enough. And it often comes at the expense of our environment, and it sometimes comes at the expense of our relationships, and it comes for some of us at the expense of our self-esteem, because so much of our self-image is tied up in status or possessions or achievement or lifestyle in ways that we don't even fully understand or admit. And there we go. So, I'll begin by confessing no expertise in the area of sufficiency or simplicity. But I did spend some time this week flipping through the Bible and pondering. And I decided to start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. And that led me to Genesis and to the foundational myth of Adam and Eve. Now, myths are not factual. This story doesn't attempt to be a precise creation history with its talking serpent, for example. But we can study myths and we can come away with truths and fresh understandings if we take the time. And the thing that struck me afresh this time is the curious arrangement that God makes with Adam and Eve. God places them in a beautiful garden, a place where all of their fundamental needs are met. And God says, all of this, all that surrounds you, all that you see is yours to eat and to enjoy, to cultivate and consume. All that you need is here, but you can't have that. That being the tree of knowledge of good and evil that stands at the center of the garden, but I'm less interested in the specifics and more interested in the situation. God provides a sufficiency, indeed more than a sufficiency. God provides an abundance, and God sets a limit upon the man's and the woman's consumption. You may have all of this and none of that. Enter the voice of temptation, characterized here in the form of a talking serpent. And the voice of temptation says, you need not accept any limits. The forbidden fruit of the forbidden fruit of that tree is good. It's good for you. It's better and tastier than all the fruit you've been given. God is holding out on you. And when they saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, they took some and ate it, and that's where things started to go badly askew. Now, it's only a myth, we might say, only a story. It isn't history or fact or science. But I want to entertain that something, without being factual, can still communicate foundational truths. Let's simply observe that in the story, God places Adam and Eve in a situation of bounded desire or bounded consumption. You may have this, but not that. And they instead choose boundless desire and unbounded consumption, and it leads to trouble. God intends for us to have everything we need, but not everything we desire. Now I'm going to jump ahead in the biblical text, and ahead to a different type of biblical text. We're going to move from mythology and biblical prehistory to law, and specifically to the Ten Commandments. Now, the Ten Commandments, as they're set forth, document the conditions of proper relationships between humans and God and between humans and one another, and they're pretty familiar to us. Most people in our culture, even those who really aren't church folks, can name at least several of the commandments. Don't kill, don't steal, honor your father and mother. And a lot of people know the one about the Sabbath, but most people mostly ignore that one these days. But tucked away down in that list is one that doesn't get a ton of attention. Neither shall you covet your neighbor's spouse, neither shall you desire your neighbor's house, or field, or ox, or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, covet is an old-timey word. It means not only to admire, but to become obsessed by or consumed with a desire for. Covetousness is a state of boundless desire or boundless consumption. And if we think back to that foundational myth, that fundamental way that the world works, when we began to shift our focus from all that we have to what we do not have or should not have, we began to yearn for or to grasp for more than we've been given, and then we began to borrow trouble. Now, there are some yes buts to be addressed, but be patient. I hope to address them in a minute. But for now, I just want to stay at this notion of bounded desire or limited desire, which might also be called satisfaction or sufficiency. What I have is enough. What I am is enough. And learning to live there, learning to inhabit that state of satisfaction or sufficiency is an important spiritual practice. I had a wise farmer in my first church, and he had a saying, usually delivered with a wry smile, which was, "All I want is what joins me." And what that meant is, I own a certain number of acres of land on which I live and plant my crops and graze my cattle. But if I just had that adjoining land, well, it has a stream where the cattle could drink, or it's more level and less rocky. If I had that parcel of land that joins me, well, then I'd truly have everything I need. Except, and this is why he always delivered the saying with a wry smile, there is, of course, a parcel of land that joins that one. And if that were acquired, there would be a parcel of land that joins that. So I only want what joins me is actually a description of unbounded or unfulfilled or unlimited desire. And as to wanting what we do not have, as to desiring or coveting what has not been given to us, Well, the Bible has some cautionary tales to tell. But before I get to those, I want to direct us to an illustration of what the world is like when God's will is done. And it's a familiar story, the story of God providing manna to God's people in the wilderness. And I don't want to dwell here, but again, God places the children of Israel in a circumstance of bounded consumption. God provides manna every morning, an abundance, a sufficiency, but God also sets limits. Gather only enough for yourself and your family. Don't attempt to gather excess. Don't attempt to be in competition who can run the fastest or range the farthest or gather the most. Do not desire more than you have been given. Do not grasp after more than you've been provided, because the excess simply goes bad and breeds worms. And the children of Israel are invited to trust in what God has freely given, a sufficiency, rather than to grasp after and to compete for more than what has been given. And I share this story simply to call our attention once more to the notion of bounded desire or bounded consumption. Now, quickly on to the cautionary tales of what happens when our desires are unbounded or unlimited, when our focus shifts from what we have to what joins us. Two quick stories. The first is found in 1 Kings chapter 21, and it is the story of Naboth's vineyard. And I invite you to review it at your convenience, but in brief, the story is this. There is a king of Israel, King Ahab, who has vast wealth and vast holdings of land, except there's a piece of land that joins him, so to speak, that he desires. Naboth's vineyard. And the king desires Naboth's vineyard in order to plant a vegetable garden. So he approaches Naboth and he says, "You give me your vineyard, which I desire, and in return, I will pay you handsomely for it, or I'll give you an even better vineyard that does not adjoin my castle." Point is, I want what's yours, so how do we make that happen? And Naboth responds, "We can't make it happen. I don't want your money. I don't want a different or better vineyard. This is my ancestors' land, and I'm satisfied with it, and I don't desire anything else." Well, Ahab is a king, and he's not used to hearing no. Kings tend to desire and to acquire. Kings tend to covet. They always want the land that joins them. So Ahab has Naboth stoned, murdered, and he takes his vineyard by force. And God disapproves, and the story does not end well, but I just want to hit it as a touch and go. It's the move from what has been given to what has been prohibited or not given, from sufficiency to boundless desire that leads to disaster. Okay, one more story. Maybe a little more familiar, from 2 Samuel chapter 11, the story of David and Bathsheba. I just have to quote the beginning line of the story from the Bible because it seems telling. In the spring, at the time when kings go out to war, that is, at the time when kings go out to conquer what joins them. Anyway, it's spring, and the Israelite army is off doing army things, but David remains in Jerusalem, and he's out on the roof of the palace, and he looks over and sees a woman bathing on a nearby roof. It's Bathsheba, and she's very beautiful. And she's also the wife of Uriah, a commander in the Israelite army. Again, David's a king. He has much, including wealth and power and influence and fame, but what he does not have, and what he cannot have, at least by any legal means, is a relationship with Bathsheba, another man's wife. Well, short story long, David covets Bathsheba just as Ahab coveted Naboth's vineyard, and the story goes about the same. Unable to have what he wants, David takes what he wants. He arranges to have Bathsheba's husband Uriah killed in battle and takes Bathsheba as his own wife, not that she has much say in the matter. And God disapproves, and the story does not end well. Just as the story of Adam and Eve does not end well, just as the story of Naboth's vineyard does not end well, just as most stories of dissatisfaction, of grasping, of coveting, of desiring in an unhealthy or unfaithful way that which is not ours, are stories of a path to broken relationships, to injustice, and to destruction. So I hold up as a spiritual discipline or as a spiritual practice the practice of being satisfied, of acknowledging and being grateful for our sufficiency, of inventorying what we do have and not inventorying what we do not have. Don't desire your neighbor's vineyard, don't desire your neighbor's spouse, and maybe, here's where I quit preaching and go to meddling, maybe don't desire that thing on Amazon that I really want but don't really need. Maybe be satisfied. Maybe acknowledge enoughness. The Rolling Stones song, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, is actually a lament. I try and I try and I try and I try, I can't get no satisfaction. The spiritual practice that is an antidote to that is to practice satisfaction, to acknowledge sufficiency, to say and to pray, I am enough and I have enough. I am enough and I have enough. I am satisfied with what I have been given, and I will not yearn or grasp after what I have not. Now, I mentioned earlier some yes buts that need to be addressed. Taken at a surface level, this spiritual practice of satisfaction or sufficiency is a counsel to accept or to be fulfilled by your station or your circumstances in life. And that's easy for me to say with my 2 cars and my house and my ability to have everything I need and much of what I want simply delivered to my doorstep. But what about people who don't have enough? Who have dirt floors to my carpeted floors, who have hunger to my plenty? Should they be satisfied with their lack? Should they accept their station in life, what they've been given, and not aspire to better? You begin to see the flaw in my sermon. Just be satisfied. You were born a Dalit. Be happy to be a Dalit. You shouldn't aspire to be a Brahmin. Is my sermon a counsel to accept a fundamentally unjust caste system? I certainly hope not. The corrective to the flaw, I think, is this. If we all take inventory of what we have, not focusing upon what we desire or covet beyond what we have, then those who have beyond a sufficiency should be moved by gratitude and by compassion and by neighborliness and by fundamental decency and by justice to tend to the needs of those who have an insufficiency, both through charity and through pursuit of just and righteous human relationships. It's back to the circumstances of the manna in the wilderness. If I am faster and stronger and better equipped to gather manna and to feed my family, I am called to stop at a sufficiency and to see to it that those who are unable to gather manna as fast or as efficiently have enough to eat. And that way, everyone has enough to eat. There's a saying that applies here, I think. Live simply that others may simply live. The biblical text, then, is not a call for the poor to be satisfied with their situation or their life station, but for the wealthy and the privileged to acknowledge their wealth and their privilege and to be dissatisfied with the disparity. And the Bible is full to overflowing with texts that call upon the privilege to be mindful to the plight of the disadvantaged. The 23rd chapter of Leviticus counsels, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God. Far from gazing covetously upon what joins us, this is counsel not to consume completely what we have been given, but to share it, to make provision for those who have less or who don't have enough. Meanwhile, the author of James counsels, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. So that's the corrective. Practice sufficiency, and if you're privileged to have a sufficiency, practice compassion and charity and justice toward those who do not. I quoted those great theologians, the Rolling Stones, earlier, so I'll conclude by quoting them again. You can't always get what you want, unbounded desire. But if you try sometimes, you might find you get what you need. The prophet Isaiah writes, "Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come and buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your earnings for that which does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food." May God bless to our hearing this message from God's Word. Amen.